Well, folks, I'm out here in Boston for day 2 of PAX, but that doesn't mean the Nintendo Switch 2 news has stopped. No, folks, we have a bunch of Nintendo Switch 2 news to bring to you today. Furukawa talking about Switch 2 and learning some new details out of the recent investors meeting, and just a lot of interesting stories about games coming to Switch 2, future games coming to Switch 2. Look, I like days like this because we have a nice little mix of very interesting stories to get into. There'll be timestamps down below. But I want to remind you that we are giving away 2 Nintendo Switch 2 Mario Kart World bundles. To enter, all you have to do is go down to the pinned comment or the link in the description. I wish everybody luck. And let's go ahead and dive right in. This first story we have here, you see, Nintendo reserves the right to brick your console following unauthorized use in a bid to prevent piracy. What's very interesting about this update here, as you go in here, it talks about unauthorized use. It talks about the license key of digital products and Nintendo accounts and all of this stuff. It says any digital products registered to your Nintendo account and any updates such as digital product are licensed for only personal and non-commercial use on a user device. Digital products must not be used for any other purpose in particular without NOE's written consent. Yada 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 yada. Basically, they're saying they have the ability to delete, ban your account, or the system associated to it. What's interesting about this story isn't so much that the headlines are incorrect. It's that guys, this is literally nothing new. Nintendo's been doing this since the consoles first got internet access on the Wii and DS. This is not a new policy. People are acting like this is new and like, ooh, boo on you, big evil Nintendo. And hey, I'm not saying that this is good. What I am saying is that this isn't unusual. Nintendo's had this ability the whole time. They have many, many stories have broken over the years of Nintendo bricking systems because of it breaking the end user license agreement. This is literally like common. And by the way, this language they have also exists on PlayStation, Xbox, even Steam. So it's common language. I think people are grabbing onto things that, yes, it sucks that this language exists, but it's also industry standard. So let's move on to a story about fantasy life on Nintendo Switch 2, because we have a tweet here directly from the Japanese account that says Nintendo Switch 2 edition to be released. For those who have purchased the Nintendo Switch version, you can upgrade to the Nintendo Switch 2 edition for 300 yen. With improved resolution and frame rate, you can enjoy your adventure even more comfortably. Click here for details. And that's really cool. I like when we see these Nintendo Switch 2 versions of games pop up. We're doing an English translation here. And it says compatible with Switch 2. Supports high resolution, high frame rate. Again, it offers smoother gameplay. It's not offering anything else. Now, Nintendo seems to be offering these sorts of updates on their games practically for free. But obviously, third parties are free to do what they want, call it what they want, charge what they want. So we just have to leave it at that. Another thing that we do need to talk about, and this is a really crappy thing from Nintendo and is not necessarily standard, although they aren't the first person to do this. They made another change to their end user license agreement, and this applies very broadly, not just to their consoles, but their theme parks and stuff. And it's important that I note that because Nintendo is pushing something that actually has been shot down in court and may not be legal. A new update to Nintendo's EULA prevents users from filing class action lawsuits against them. People will know that Disney had a very similar one here. It says, many pointed out, Disney did a similar thing with a couple who attended a Disneyland park who couldn't sue the company for the wife's fatal allergic reaction because they had a Disney Plus subscription and they had agreed to the Disney Plus EULA. Thankfully, this didn't stand up in court. So the big thing about this isn't that this isn't crappy, because this is very crappy, Nintendo trying to block class action lawsuits just for using any of their services for anything Nintendo related. But as we saw with Disney, who everyone was almost shocked that Disney lost, they weren't shocked because it wasn't the right thing to do. They were shocked because it showed big corporation that you can't just make up any policy you want and have it hold up in the court of law. And I'm guessing that Nintendo has this policy enacted more so for their theme parks, kind of like Disney. But look, in the end, this is probably not legal, so I'm not like super worried about it. It is a shitty thing Nintendo put in their end user license agreement for all of their products. But again, it probably won't hold up in court. There's probably no way Nintendo can prevent class action lawsuits. Like if they're trying to prevent a class action over new Joy-Con drift or something, chances are it wouldn't legally stand up in court that they could actually enforce that part of their licensing agreement. So there you go. Still crappy Nintendo's doing it. Welcome. They're a business. And I wish they wouldn't attempt to do these things that have already been defeated in court, but it is what it is. Now, one thing we can get excited about is the level of third-party support coming to Switch 2, and we have some backing behind this. We head on over here to Go Nintendo, where we see an analyst says the level of Switch 2 third-party support is something we haven't seen on Nintendo hardware maybe ever. So it says when Nintendo pulled back the curtain on Switch 2, they did so showing a strong showing of third-party support from big and small devs alike. There's definitely proof of just how far Nintendo has come in terms of relationships with other devs and publishers. And one analyst thinks that Switch 2 could be a third-party haven unlike any other Nintendo platform in history. Speaking of Games Radar, industry analyst Matt Piscatella talked at length about third-party support lined up for Switch 2. So here's what he said. Historically, Nintendo products get purchased to play Nintendo games, and Nintendo platforms aren't the first place people look to play third-party content if they have other ways of accessing that content. Perhaps that changes here because of that support and because of the hybrid nature of the device. Maybe we see that start to change this time. It's going to be super interesting to watch because we haven't seen this level of support maybe ever, but at least for a long time, maybe even since the GameCube. In terms of that third-party partnership approach, that's not something Nintendo had really pushed so much in prior launches. And, he has a point. Nintendo hasn't had full third-party support, especially from the AAA sphere, in a long time. And I think that Switch 2 is perfectly set up to get a ton of third-party support, at least over the next 5 years. Now, one of those games it's getting is a game that it did also get on Switch, but people are very curious about how it functions on Switch 2, and that is Hogwarts Legacy. So let's go ahead and look at a story about that over here on Video Game Chronicles. It says Hogwarts Legacy Switch 2 resolution confirmed, along with DLSS support, which is, I believe, the second third-party game confirming DLSS is being used. But as we scroll down here, according to a Japanese press release on 4Gamer by Sega, which is publishing the Switch 2 version of the game in Japan, that's why Sega's name is coming up, the game will render at a 1440p resolution while docked. This is likely DLSS upscaled to 1440p, and at the screen's full 1080p resolution when in handheld mode. Both modes will also support HDR. The game will also support NVIDIA's DLSS upscaling technique, making it the second high-profile Switch game confirmed to use it, the first one being Cyberpunk 2077. I think you're going to see almost all AAA third-party games are probably using DLSS. Now, the game will also feature improved lighting and shadow quality, anti-aliasing, and much more significantly upgraded graphics for a deeper immersive experience compared to the original Switch release. One of the most notable improvements also mentioned is that the removal of loading screens during open world exploration. The Switch game was criticized for its lengthy loading screens every time the player entered or left a shop in Hogsmeade, but these loading screens have now been removed according to the publisher. The performance of the Nintendo Switch 2 has not only improved the frame rate of the Switch version, but also reduced the loading time, it adds via machine translation. You can comfortably fly around Hogwarts, grounds, and beyond. It also will support mouse controls. So that's pretty cool. I think that this is all just good news. Obviously, we want to start seeing some newer games, not just old games getting updates, but hey, it's better than nothing. And you know what's better than nothing? Nintendo's investors meeting. So they had an investors meeting, and they had it like 2 nights ago, and they had a Q&A and everything. And like the big takeaways from the meeting are this. Basically, they sold a little over 1 million Nintendo Switches in the last quarter. They're projecting to sell 4.5 million this fiscal year. We'll see if they hit that target. But they're projecting such a low number of Nintendo Switch sales because they're projecting 15 million Nintendo Switch 2 sales over a 10-month period this fiscal year. They did note that that is not the maximum capacity they can make. That's just their projections considering marketing conditions and stuff. They said they will also sell 45 million pieces of software, not including software bundled with the system. So setting aside bundled in Mario Kart sales, they plan to sell 45 million. So maybe it's like more like 50, 60, 70. I don't know. It's somewhere in there where they plan to sell significantly more software than that overall, but that's just including packaged and digital sales that are not bundled in. All right. That being said, obviously when we look at this, it's in Japanese. I can't read Japanese. They don't have an English version out yet. But thankfully, Google has this ability to translate documents. So we're going to go look at the Google Doc on this and just give it a read because there's a lot of interesting things that come up in here. And one thing that keeps making headlines that actually is just restating something we already heard weeks ago. All right. So we get in here and it says, Could you please explain the details and background to your forecasted sales volume for Switch 2? Don't care as much about this. They basically are just saying in here that they have a hurdle with price point for early adoption. And they're just continuing to roll it in, and that, please note that the projected sales figure was not set based on the limitations of their hardware production capacity. So they're saying we absolutely can make more, but we're just not projecting that we need to. And the tariff situation in the United States and possibly of economic downturn did not affect their projected sales. So they're not even taking tariffs into consideration. They're just taking into the fact that they need to sell this system. They need to convince people to buy it. And they do know that it's a more expensive system. So it could take a bit longer to hit like peak momentum. But we'll see. Obviously, they could be wrong, and it could fly off shelves even larger than that. But I think they're being relatively safe in their projections with 15 million, even though a lot of analysts are saying, oh, it could hit 19, it could hit 20. Yeah, maybe. But Nintendo is only planning for 15, but they have the production capacity to go higher. So they're basically just letting investors know, hey, if we do sell more than 15 million, we can. It's not a limitation. It's just, we're trying to be a little bit more conservative for our first year. Now, I believe that forecast volume for the Switch 2 hardware software sales for the fiscal year is a conservative estimate. See, even the investors being like, that seems conservative. That does not take into account user reactions at the Switch 2 trial events or the pre-order status of My Nintendo stores in each country. And basically, this just goes over how they're just planning to sell, and they reiterate the 45 million. This is expected to exceed the approximately 52 million units of software sold in 10 months since the launch of the Nintendo Switch. So again, they're just kind of leaving things where it's at, where there's not a lot here. Just, hey, our numbers are what they are. Maybe we're wrong. We'll see. Now we get into some more interesting stuff. So at the beginning of April, applications for the lottery sale of the Switch 2 began to be accepted at the My Nintendo store. In Japan, 2.2 million applications were received in 2 weeks. Compared to the Nintendo Switch, a much stronger initial response is expected. And I believe it's possible to sell more than 15 million units. See, the analysts won't let this go. And Furukawa just says the lottery sales of the My Nintendo store in Japan began on April 4th. And as a result, we received many more applications than we had anticipated. As a result, we announced in advance that a significant number of consumers would not be selected when the winners were announced on the 24th. We plan to continue to produce and ship a significant number of Nintendo Switch 2 units and are strengthening our production system. Therefore, we are not setting the sales target of 15 million units due to a supply constraint. To achieve a certain level of sales, we believe that we need to maintain momentum throughout the year, not just in the early stages, and so we have to set this figure as our initial plan, which makes a lot of sense. If you think about it, Nintendo has to consider a lot of factors when they put these numbers out there, and one of them is, hey, success isn't guaranteed. And we need to make sure we're not like putting expectations of like 20 million units out there. Maybe we do sell 20 million, but we're not going to put those expectations out there. We need to be more realistic about this. We need to maintain momentum past launch. And, that's not an assured thing. No matter what games they have coming, they need to make sure that value proposition stays. So we'll see if they continue to do that. But then we get to this part. It says, please tell us what you're thinking of the earnings of your consolidated financial forecast for the fiscal year, ending with the operating profit expected to be to increase year on year, but it seems to be a smaller increase compared to the sales increase. And basically, this is where he gets into the whole talk about how the yen exchange rate and things dealing with Nintendo and the tariffs and year-on-year declines and all this sort of stuff. They have to realize that the policy is to recognize the tariffs as a cost and incorporate them into prices in any country or region where they are imposed. So that's their basic policy. But it says our unique situation is that this year marks the first new hardware launch in 8 years. We are prioritizing maintaining momentum of our platform, which is extremely important for our dedicated video game business, and promoting early adoption of new hardware. But this is the thing. This is the one that people are clinging onto. And we already heard this from Doug Bowser. So if the tax assumptions change, we will consider that price adjustments would be appropriate, taking into account various factors, including market environment. And this is where people are running with the headlines that Nintendo is going to increase prices of Switch 2. This is literally exactly what Doug Bowser said, that we didn't consider tariffs when we initially priced the system. We're happy with where the price is at. If the situation changes, we might have to make adjustments. Literally, Doug Bowser said this like 3 weeks ago, and now we're running headlines yet again about Furukawa repeating what was already said. No, they're not planning to raise the price. They are assuming they don't even need to raise the price. That's why I read that prior sentence first. Furukawa is assuming they are not going to have to make any price adjustments. Their projections all include not making any price changes. However, they have to note that unforeseen circumstances like tariffs massively rising on Vietnam could naturally lead to prices having to go up. So he's just noting that it could happen. They're not expecting it to happen, and they're not planning to raise prices. So a little bit of a misleading headline when you see Nintendo says it's going to go up. Like, no, that's not what they said. but people like to clickbait a little bit. Question 5. I would like to ask about the medium to long-term direction of Nintendo Switch Online. The number of things you can do throughout the Switch Online, such as Nintendo Music and Game Chat on Switch 2. I think Nintendo Switch Online will continue to grow as a stable source of revenue. I also like to know about the possibility of introducing new elements that make users want to continue subscribing. Achievements, perhaps? The number of Nintendo Switch Online members fluctuates depending on factors such as hardware sales and the release trends of titles that utilize online play. However, since we disclosed the number of members at our last corporate policy briefing, the number of subscribers has remained stable with no significant fluctuations. Going forward, we will be releasing titles that utilize online play, such as Mario Kart World, for the Nintendo Switch 2. In addition to releasing new titles like these, we aim to maintain and increase the number of members in the medium to long term by further expanding the Nintendo Switch Online service itself. On Switch 2, Nintendo Switch Online service, plus add-on pack members can play GameCube titles. In addition, communication function with Game Chat will be introduced. Okay, these are all things we know, but they're just talking about, hey, you get this when you pay for the service. Game Chat was developed with the aim of recreating the experience of playing games together as a child in today's environment. Until now, people have not only bought the same games to play together, but also played different games while in the same place. By using the functions of Nintendo Switch 2, you can create this experience not only in offline local multiplayer, but also online. Game Chat can be enjoyed not only with Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive titles, but also with titles for Nintendo Switch. We hope that the Game Chat will add new value to our software, right? Then it goes on to Nintendo Switch Online also offers Nintendo Music. Something that wasn't brought up. And the service focuses on music, one of the most appealing aspects of games. It aims to help you remember Nintendo's characters, games, and IP, even when you're away from your game console. So they think that's a nice value that can push it. And then Nintendo Switch Online is a service that customers can enjoy for a long time, and will continue to develop it in the medium and long term. I want to grow it. To that end, I really want to join this service. I mean, Furukawa, of course you want to join your own service. You made it. Question 6. I would like to confirm the assumptions regarding the U.S. tariffs in your earnings forecast. Additional tariffs will be imposed on products made in China, but I'm correct in understanding you are only factoring in 10% baseline tariff as of April 10th on the assumption that products made outside of China are exported to the U.S. Also, if further tariff measures are imposed in the future, would you consider passing the cost of sales on the prices? And the funny thing is, he already answered this question by saying, well, yeah, if it goes up, we're going to increase prices, but we're not planning on it going up. So our forecast is based on the assumption that tariffs in the United States are at 10% for Japan, Vietnam, Cambodia, and 145 for China, because that's what the current tariffs are at. Hardware is produced in China, Vietnam, and Cambodia, with hardware for North America being produced primarily in Vietnam. I only brought up the question for that particular statement because we had that report out of Nikkei that was being like, oh, Vietnam is just a very small part of what's being made for North America, and it's really mostly being made in China, so 145% tariff scare. They're going to massively jack prices up a Switch 2. False! Furukawa came right out and said, no, it's Vietnam. They're primarily made in Vietnam. They're the main supplier for North America. No crap. It's like we've known this for a while, but for some reason, people want to run with those headlines. We all know what those reasons are. Let's continue. So we get down to the next question here, question 8. I would like to ask about positioning of the Switch 2. Will future new hardware be similar to the Nintendo Switch? This is a very good question, by the way. Maybe the best question in the bunch. A lot of people wondering what the future of Nintendo is like. Or is the Nintendo Switch 2 a bridge to an innovative next-generation console that has yet to be announced? I don't feel much innovation from Nintendo Switch 2 that would change the generation. Is this just a one-off, or will the plan be to continue updating each function while inheriting the concept of the Switch rather than releasing hardware with a completely new concept? Furukawa says, development of Nintendo Switch 2 began as an official internal project around 2019. We are constantly conducting research and development into new hardware, including basic technology research. Nintendo Switch has been blessed with many good fortunes. Even in its 9th year, many consumers are playing it. However, over the past 8 years, one of Nintendo's most important priorities, proposing new ways to play, has meant that software developers need higher hardware processing power to realize this. This time, we aim to design hardware with greater capacity in terms of processing power. We believe that Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza propose new ways to play that could not be realized on Nintendo Switch. What they're saying there is their developers wanted more power. They didn't want to change what the system was. They just wanted more power. So Nintendo gave them more power, and now we're getting games that they couldn't realize fully on Switch. That's what he's saying. You don't have to believe him if you don't want, but that's straight from the guy who runs Nintendo. All right. as we dive into this. Regarding your question about the innovation of hardware, Nintendo Switch 2 may not look like much has changed in appearance. However, the hardware and peripherals have been completely redesigned. It has been completely remade and is packed with the ingenuity and attention to detail of Nintendo's development team, who developed both the hardware and software together. I feel it has become a very Nintendo-like product. Going forward, we will continue to develop a variety of titles centered around the Switch 2 and provide new play experiences. By creating hardware that continues to surprise consumers with fresh content, we aim for the Nintendo Switch 2 to be the new standard for Nintendo Switch. What they're basically saying is, if we continue the Switch brand, yeah, we're going to keep doing like a Switch 3, a Switch 4, a Switch 5, if we decide to continue it. And we believe the innovation comes in the games themselves, not via the hardware. There's something I've talked about before, that like you can make all the wonky controller schemes and all this that you want, but ultimately the games are what create the innovation, not the hardware. So they're basically saying, yeah, we're not really planning to go away from this strategy unless something drastically changes in the Switch family. Like if Switch 2 bombs, yeah, we'll probably decide a new direction. If it goes really, really well, yeah, we're probably going to do a Switch 3, right? It just kind of makes sense. And that's it. As you see here, that is the final question. I have one last story I wanted to go over just because I think it's kind of funny. You guys remember the Genki stuff about how Nintendo's suing them, and I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but Genki is at PAX East, so I got to go and check out their booth and meet with them. I had a set meeting, and they have these signs there that I find funny. It's right here. It says, "Notice this is a prototype and is not affiliated with or endorsed by Nintendo," and they put the trademark by Nintendo's name. They know they're being sued. They're well aware. I even had my fake Nintendo Switch 2 like replica, took it out. They were not too happy to have that around their booth. Please no photos with it on our booth. Please don't record it at our booth. Yeah, they know what's up. But yeah, I'm not here to give you any opinions on Genki's products right now. We can save that for future videos and or live stream events. But yeah, I think it's interesting that their booth is like, hey, yeah, very obvious we're being sued because we have very obvious signage, and that's not the only one. They have like these plastered all over their booth that they are not affiliated with Nintendo. So take that for what you will. All right, guys, I thought it was a little fun story to end here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I am Nathaniel Rufflejans, and I'll catch you in the next video.